Hey guys, this time around I have an older game for you all, and it's Mazin Wars or Mazin Saga depending on where you live for the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis. I'm lucky to have this one fully boxed, because it has such a badass box art. However, I must admit that at a glance, the box art looks like a bit of a mess, because the main character at the front tends to blend with the background. It's all blue and all you really see is a lot of blue and a bit of red and orange. However, once you take a good look at it, you realize that it's a very well drawn, highly detailed character, and he looks pretty darn badass. Now, it's a shame my cartridge is a little torn up, but hey, it works. It bought my Mega Drives, so it's all good. I mean, as long as it plays, I'm happy. However, it would have been nice if it was in better condition. I don't know how this happened, but it happened. Well, I have games in worse condition than this. Alrighty then, let's talk a little bit about the game now. So, I've had this game for years. I don't know how long I've had it, and I never got around to playing it much. And boy, did I miss out on a great game as a kid. So, I played it recently, and I must admit, I really like the game. And I'm telling you right off the bat, I love this game. So apparently, this game is based on some long-running manga series, which spawned different versions, different animes, different mangas. And I must admit, I never got around to watching any of the animes. Even though I like my Japanese animation, I enjoy animation in general. And comics, I don't read, so I never read the mangas, and probably never will. I honestly don't care enough about it. But what's interesting is that the main character, the Mazinger, I have no idea how to pronounce that thing. Usually he's portrayed as a big mech, a big giant robot. Now in this case, what we have is a guy in a high-tech armor, high-tech suit, which can grow to gigantic proportions when needed. And we'll take a look at that a little bit later. It actually shows up in the game quite a bit. So even though I've never seen any of the animes, I've never read any of the comics, it doesn't matter, because you can just jump in and play the game, enjoy the game. It's still fun. It doesn't have much of a story. It probably has something. I mean, it says something on the back of the box, and it says something, I guess, in the intro, but it doesn't matter, because you can just play it. You can hack and slash at enemies. It's actually a pretty standard beat 'em up. In this case, I guess you could say it's a hack and slash game, because your guy has a sword. Speaking of which, you better learn how to use that sword well early on, or you're gonna get in deep trouble. So let me tell you something. At first, when I got this game, when I first played it, I didn't like it, because the game felt quite stiff. The controls felt stiff, and I didn't feel that I was in control of my character at all. And it didn't take long for me to realize, now there's this thing, I'll tell you about it, there's this thing about games that you want your characters to be almost an extension of yourself. If you don't have that, you don't feel right. You just don't feel right. You don't play right. And it didn't take long for me to realize that in this particular game, there's quite a few moves you can do, and each of those moves needs to be utilized, need to be used just right in just the right moment. And when you do that, when you learn how to control your character, you quickly realize that he's actually quite agile. He's quite agile. He's actually pretty darn good to control, and that stiffness actually is what you would, I guess, use as precision in your movement in combat. Now, there's a bunch of moves you can use, and you need to learn to use them right, and you need to use them at just the right time, as I said. But there is one move I absolutely hate, and I'll tell you why. It's the special. It's, every beat 'em up, and usually games like this, they have this special where you lose a little bit of health, it drains a bit of your health, and attacks enemies on both sides of the character. And that's fine, and I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem in this game is that move wastes an entire button, and there's absolutely no reason for an entire button to be wasted on that one move, because you can easily perform the same damn move by pressing 2 buttons. It usually works when you hit the jump button, you hit the attack button. Usually in other games it does that. What that one button, that it's a whole button, could have been used for is defense. Now, I'm not a type who likes to use defensive moves in games, but in this particular game, in combat here, there's quite often you get the opportunity to actually defend yourself, and you can't do that because the only button that could have used the defensive move is used for the god dang health draining move, which you don't even need, and if you play well, you won't even have to use it most of the time. You see, guys, Mazin Wars is one of those games where you can easily make it from point A to point B, so as long as you know what you're doing, as long as you are in control of your character, as long as you do your moves right, as long as you know how to tackle each enemy that comes your way. Now, the moment you lose your focus, the moment you lose your concentration, the moment you lose your control, you're gonna have your ass kicked even by the easiest of enemies. And this, I don't know if this is a good thing or not. You know, on one hand, it's a good thing because the game keeps you on edge. The game wants you to know what you're doing at all times, and it wants you to be in control. On the other hand, if you're like me and after hard days at work, you'll just want to pick up a game and play for a little bit, you know, some easy to pick up and play game, like a beat 'em up or a racing game or whatever, or a shmup. And you want to doze off while you play your game. It ain't good. It just ain't a good thing because you're gonna lose all your lives in no time. As I said, even the easiest of enemies can be quite dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But you know what? It's a good thing, I guess. It's a good thing that the game wants you to actually play it. So once you've done your share of fighting, it's time to face the bosses. And the bosses actually are pretty darn interesting in this one. Each boss fight has sort of 2 segments or 2 parts to it. The first time you face a boss, it's this enormous, it's this huge monster. And you just face it in your average tiny little high-tech suit of armor and try to deal as much damage to it as possible. Now when the time is right, as I mentioned earlier, your Maziner? I have no idea how to pronounce this thing. I don't know what it's even called. I guess Mazinger, something like that. Doesn't matter. You're a robot guy. Your playable character transforms in a gigantic version of itself, and this is when you can actually face the bosses toe to toe, and fight them fair and square in the middle of a city or in the middle of a desert. Doesn't matter, wherever they decided to come and destroy the world, I guess. Or whatever. I have no idea what these things want. I personally, honestly, do not care. What I do know is that, hey, they're gigantic monsters, they're destroying everything in their way, and I'm here to stop them and have a good time doing it. So what happens is, actually the game finally does something that I've been wanting it to do since the very beginning. The A button, the one that was used for that lame, idiotic special attack that drains your health, well, it's finally used as a defensive button. Let me tell you, it works great. It works perfectly fine. And the game should have been doing that from the start because you actually need to defend yourself in this game. Now, second portions of the boss fights are a little different. They're structured differently, and combat is much different actually this time around. It's slower, it's much more sluggish. And I think that's a good thing because, you're fighting with a giant robot against an equally gigantic monster who's as big as a building. They're bigger than buildings. And I guess it works quite well. Now, I don't know. I'm not a game designer. I'm an artist. I'm a graphics designer. I'm an illustrator for children's books. So I don't know if this is well designed. I don't know if this is well programmed. What I do know is I love these fights. They're fun. They're great. And you want to learn to control your giant version of your robot early on, because you'll be facing a hell of a lot more of these big monsters by the end of the game. These type of fights are actually going to become quite common at the end, so you want to be ready for what's coming. Mazin Wars is a pretty decent looking game. Now, I wouldn't say it's the best on the Mega Drive, far from it, but what it does is it captures that old school urban feel quite well. You know, many games back then, late 80s and 90s, the mid 90s, early to mid 90s, did this quite well for some reason. I don't know why, I don't know what the deal is with this, but many of these type of games, beat 'em ups and I guess some of the shooters, they have this really interesting sort of urban environments, and I like the way they're done, and Mazin Wars is no exception to this. Now, where the visuals really shine are the one-on-one battles, when, well, I wouldn't play a game solely based around those battles, because honestly they're fun, but they're not something I'd actually care to play an entire game of. Visually, they're quite stunning. Now, what they do is they sort of feel like they're in a rounded arena of sorts, thanks to the great parallax scrolling effects they've done. And the animation is much smoother, much more expressive this time around compared to the animation in the levels. They're actually very good looking portions of the game. Now, when it comes to audio, Mazin Wars is not that good. Now, I'm not saying it's terrible, I'm not saying that the music is terrible, but it's forgettable at best. And my problem is, you know, given the source material, given the context, given the whole, theme of the game, we could have had a much better music. We could have had a lot more than what we got. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't expect every game to sound as good as Streets of Rage 2 and 3. I understand that's unrealistic. However, I think a lot more could have been done, and this particular game deserves a much better musical treatment than it got. Sound effects are average. They're not bad, they're not good. They're what you'd say normally from a game from that time period. But I think, while the music is by no means terrible, it could have been something really good given the game's theme, given the game's source material. Bottom line is, Mazin Wars is a great game, and I wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone who wants a nice action game for their Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis. Now, here's something you should know. The US version is actually slightly better because it has more options. You have easy mode, you have normal and hard mode, as well as adjustable number of lives, whereas us Europeans, we only got normal mode and hard mode and only 2 lives and a spare, and that's it. We don't get to adjust the number of lives, which I think isn't fair. I mean, I don't know why they did what they did. I guess maybe the European version came out first. I don't know why they did this, but I think it's always nice to have more options. Either way, this is a great game. Hope you'll enjoy it. If you don't, that's fine. You'll play something you like more. But give the game a chance, see how you like it, and let me know.